Chapter 1, The Warden of Obsidian. I was born to be a butcher, not a king, and every grain of wheat I counted today felt like a drop of blood on my hands. I stood on the high balcony of the Obsidian Citadel. The wind bit at my face. It tasted like iron and old snow. Below me, the kingdom was silent. It was a graveyard piece. I kept it that way because if the world started moving, the ghosts of the Silver Veil would finally catch me. Truth be told, I liked the cold. It was the only thing that felt as empty as my chest. Still, my wolf wasn't happy. He paced behind my ribs. His claws scratched at my soul. He wanted to run. He wanted to howl. But I kept him locked in a cage of silk and stone. Because of that, I was the perfect king for the council. I was predictable. I was frozen. I stared at the ledger in my hands. We had enough food for the winter. Just enough to keep people from revolting. Not enough to let them thrive. Moments later, the heavy oak doors groaned open. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The smell of expensive musk and stale power filled the air. High Chancellor Vane stepped onto the balcony. He moved like a snake in a tailored suit. "The grain reports are boring," Torin, Vane whispered. His voice was smooth as oil. "In fact, today is a day for celebration. Or have you forgotten?" I tightened my grip on the stone railing. "I forget nothing, Vane." "Good," he said. "Because it has been exactly 10 years since we ended the Silver Veil threat. We wiped out the rot. We brought an order. And tonight, at the mating ball, you will pick a mate who keeps that order alive." Deep down, she knew the truth. Vane was talking about a puppet. He wanted me to marry a girl who would smile for the cameras and keep her mouth shut about the massacres. My wolf let out a low, rumbling growl. It was a sound of pure disgust. "You want me to breed," I said. My voice was flat. "Like a prize dog." "I want you to lead," Vane corrected. "But then, leading is just following the rules we set for you. Don't be difficult. The noble women are already arriving. They are pretty. They are rich. Most importantly, they are safe." Instead of answering, I looked out at the dead zone. It was a gray wasteland on the horizon. Nothing lived there. At least, that's what the council told everyone. Yet, I could feel something out there. A pull. A tiny, flickering light in the dark. "Go get dressed," Vane snapped. "The council is watching. Don't disappoint us again." He left. The silence returned, but it felt heavier now. As the silence stretched, I felt a shiver travel down my spine. It wasn't from the cold. It was an instinct. Something was coming. Something that didn't care about ledgers or grain reserves. Something that was going to tear my world apart. Chapter 2, The Scent of a Ghost. The obsidian armor felt like a second skin, but it was a skin that didn't breathe. I stood in front of the mirror. My servants were shaking. They were always shaking when they touched me. Maybe it was because they could sense the monster hiding under the velvet cape. I looked at the man in the glass. He was a stranger. He had dark eyes that had seen too much death. He had a crown that felt like a circle of thorns. "Tighten the belt," I growled. The servant jumped. "Yes, Alpha King. Right away." What followed was a ritual of vanity I hated. They polished my boots. They combed my hair. They tried to make the killer look like a husband. Still, my wolf was acting strange. He wasn't growling anymore. He was sniffing the air. He was restless. He was waiting for something. Without warning, the door burst open. A guard ran in. He was out of breath. His eyes were wide with fear. "Sire! There is a breach," he gasped. I was moving before he could finish. My hand went straight to the hilt of my sword. "Where? Is it a rebel attack?" "No, sire," the guard said. We don't know." A scent was picked up near the north wall. But then it vanished. It didn't smell like a wolf. It smelled like a ghost. Truth be told, I should have sent a squad to handle it. I should have stayed for the fitting. Instead, I pushed past the guard. My boots thundered against the stone floors. I followed the pull in my gut. It led me toward the servant larders. The air thickened as I got closer to the kitchens. I could smell the roasting meat for the ball. I could smell the sweet wine. But under all that was something sharp. It was the smell of damp earth. It was the smell of a forest after a fire. It was a scent that shouldn't exist in my world. "Search every shadow!" I barked at the guards. No matter how hard she tried, the intruder had left a trail. I could see a small, muddy footprint on the stone. It was tiny. A female? A child? At that moment, my heart skipped. My wolf pressed forward. He was desperate to find the source. Alpha King? Vane appeared at the end of the hall. He looked annoyed. "The guests are waiting. Why are you chasing shadows in the kitchen?" "There's an intruder," I said. My pulse was racing. "Probably just a starving rogue looking for a scrap," Vane scoffed. "Leave it to the guards. You have a ball to attend. You have a mate to find, remember?" I stared at the dark corner where the scent was strongest. It felt like a string was pulling at my soul. As if fate demanded it, I turned away. I walked back toward the ballroom. But I knew one thing for sure. The ghost wasn't gone. It was already inside. Chapter 3: The Starving Mate. The ballroom was a sea of gold and fake smiles. Music played, but it sounded like noise to me. I sat on my throne. I watched the noble women dance. They were all beautiful. They were all wearing too much perfume. It made my head ache. I was scanning the room for threats, but my soul was scanning for that ghost. Soon after, the banquet was served. The long tables were covered in food. There were whole pigs. There were towers of fruit. There were pies that smelled like heaven. To make things worse, the wolves in the room were acting like gluttons. They laughed while they stuffed their faces. They had no idea that people were starving just miles away. In the quiet that followed a loud song, I saw her. She was in the shadows by the far table. She was wearing a dirty, tattered cloak. She was so thin she looked like she might break in the wind. She wasn't dancing. She was stealing. Her hands were moving fast. She was grabbing loaves of bread. She was shoving dried meat into a bag. She didn't know what scared her more, the guards or the hunger. Her movements were frantic. Her breath caught as a guard walked past. She froze. She looked like a deer in the sights of a hunter. The moment their eyes locked, the world tilted. She looked up. Her hood fell back. Her face was pale. Her eyes were a haunting, silver gray. She was a skeleton of a girl, but she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. With his scent in the air, her wolf stirred. I could feel it. I could feel her. Mine, my wolf roared. It wasn't a thought. It was a fact. The bond pulsed through my veins like liquid fire. It burned. It screamed. She was my mate. But as the truth unraveled, I realized the horror of it. Her scent wasn't just winter and rot. It was the silver veil. She was the daughter of the king I had killed. She saw me coming. She tried to run. But she was too weak. As her wolf stirred for the last time, her legs gave out. She collapsed toward the hard marble floor. Before she could hit the ground, I was there. My body moved on instinct. I caught her. Her body was so light. It felt like holding a bundle of sticks. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she gasped. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She was unconscious. She was starving to death in my arms. Torin! What is this? Vane shouted. He was running toward us. The whole room had gone silent. I looked down at the girl. She was the daughter of my enemy. She was the threat I was supposed to destroy. Still, I tightened my grip on her. I pulled her against my chest. Her heart was beating like a trapped bird. She's a thief, Vane barked. Guards! Take her to the cells. No, I said. My voice was a low snarl that shook the chandeliers. She stays with me. Because of that, every guard stopped. Vane's face went purple with rage. But I didn't care. The tension broke as I stood up. I carried her out of the ballroom. I carried her away from the council and the fake gold. I carried her because my soul answered to hers. And just like that, everything changed. The war wasn't over. It was just starting. And this time, I was fighting for the ghost. Chapter 4, The Gilded Cage. The heavy doors of my private chambers slammed shut with a sound like a guillotine. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care that Vane was screaming my name in the hallway. All that mattered was the girl in my arms. Her skin was so pale it looked translucent under the moonlight. As the silence roared, I laid her down on my bed. The silk sheets looked too rich for her tattered clothes. She was a ghost from a war I thought I had finished. Yet, here she was. Her breath was shallow. It was a thin, rattling sound that made my chest ache. I reached out to touch her forehead. Her skin was burning with fever, but she was shivering like she was trapped in ice. Call the physician, I barked at the guard standing at the door. Tell him if he isn't here in 3 minutes, I'll have his head. But sire, the guard stammered. The council, they want to know why a rogue is in the royal wing. Because I said so. I roared. My wolf was pacing at the edge of my mind, bared teeth and golden eyes. Go! Before she could move, the girl's hand flinched. Her fingers curled into the bedspread. She was dreaming. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I leaned closer. The space between them burned. I could smell the silver veil on her again. It was the scent of pine needles and cold mountain air. It was a smell I had tried to wash off my hands for a decade. Moments later, the physician rushed in. He was an old man with shaking hands. He took one look at her and gasped. She's starving, Alpha King, he whispered. In fact, I've never seen a shifter this close to the end. Her wolf is feeding on her own muscles just to stay alive. Truth be told, hearing it felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I had sat at that banquet table while my mate was eating her own soul to survive. What's worse, I was the one who had turned her lands into a wasteland. I was the reason she had nothing. Save her, I commanded. My voice was a broken whisper. Whatever it takes. Save her. Next, the physician began his work. He forced a clear liquid down her throat. He cleaned the grime from her face. I watched every movement. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I sat in the chair by the bed and waited for the world to start again. Chapter 5, A Blade in the Dark. The sun was just beginning to peek over the Obsidian Mountains when she finally opened her eyes. I had been sitting there all night. I hadn't moved. My armor felt like a lead weight, but I didn't take it off. I needed the reminder of who I was. As the sky darkened to a soft gray, she bolted upright. Her movement was a blur of panic. She didn't look at the silk sheets or the golden lamps. She looked for a weapon. Her hand shot out and grabbed the silver butter knife from the tray the physician had left. "Stay back," she hissed. Her voice was a cracked, dry rasp. She didn't know what scared her more, me or the fact that she was trapped. She held the knife with a trembling hand. She looked like a cornered animal. She looked like she was ready to die right there. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. I kept my hands visible. I didn't stand up. I didn't want to scare her. "Liar," she spat. A growl rose in her throat. It was weak, but it was there. "You're the Blackwood King. You're the butcher. You killed everyone." Maybe it was fate, but seeing her anger made me feel better. It meant she was still fighting. Still, the guilt in my chest was a heavy stone. "I caught you," I reminded her. "If I wanted you dead, I would have let you hit the floor. Why did you come here? Why did you risk your life for a bag of bread?" Rather than answering, her eyes darted to the door. She was looking for an exit. She didn't care about my questions. She didn't care about the bond pulsing between us. The tension broke when she tried to stand up. She made it 2 inches before her knees gave out. The silver knife clattered to the floor. I was on my feet in a second. I caught her shoulders before she could fall. The moment their eyes locked, I felt her soul answer mine. It was a pull like the tide. It was a scream of recognition. She felt it too. I saw it in the way her pupils dilated. I saw it in the way her breath hitched. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I'm the man who is going to keep you alive," I said. Before either could speak, a scrap of silk fell from her rags. I picked it up. It was a crest. A silver wolf on a blue field. The mark of the Silver Veil royalty. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she tried to snatch it back. But I held it tight. I knew the truth now. She wasn't just a rogue. She was the princess I was supposed to have killed 10 years ago. And she was my fated mate. Chapter 6, The Secret in the Cellar. "Give it back," she demanded. She reached for the silk crest. Her face was full of a desperate kind of pride. "This is treason," I said. I looked at the silver wolf in my hand. "If Vane sees this, he won't just kill you. He'll erase you." "He already tried," she screamed. Tears welled up in her silver eyes. "He sent you to do it. You burned my home. You killed my father." What followed was a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush the room. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. I had been the general. I had followed the orders. I had been a coward. I can't change the past, I said. I walked to the window. I looked out at the Citadel gates. But I can change today. You need to eat. You need to get your strength back. I don't want your food, she hissed. I want to go back. Back where? To the dead zone? To die in a hole? No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the fear that flashed across her face. It wasn't fear for herself. It was something else. She looked at the door, then at me. Her wall of anger was starting to crack. They're waiting, she whispered. Who is waiting? I asked. I stepped closer. With his scent in the air, her instincts surged. The pups, she choked out. The orphans. I have 6 of them in a cellar in the dead zone. If I don't go back, if I don't bring that food, they won't make it through the week. As the truth unraveled, my world tilted. She wasn't stealing for herself. She was starving herself to keep children alive. She was a princess who had become a rogue to be a mother to the forgotten. Please, she begged. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were cold. Kill me if you want. But take the bag. Take the bread to the northwest border. Look for the oak tree with the split trunk. Just feed them. In that moment, everything changed. I wasn't looking at an enemy. I was looking at the bravest soul I had ever met. My wolf was howling now. He wanted to run to the dead zone. He wanted to hunt for her. He wanted to protect her pack. I'll take care of it, I promised. Soon after, I heard the sound of marching boots in the hall. Vane was coming. He wouldn't be alone. Stay quiet, I whispered. I pushed her back against the pillows. Don't say a word. I have to make them think you're nothing. I have to make them believe you're a low-born feral. Why would you help me? She asked. Her voice was a soft, wandering sound. Because fate demanded it, I said. The air thickened as the door handle turned. I turned toward the entrance. I put on my mask of stone. I became the warden again. But inside, I was already planning a rescue. And she let it happen. She closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. The game was becoming dangerous. The stakes were no longer just my crown. They were the lives of 6 pups and the girl who had stolen my heart before she even knew my name. What followed was the most difficult lie of my life. Chapter 7: The King's Deception. The doors to my chambers didn't just open, they were practically heaved aside by the weight of Vane's arrogance. He marched in with 4 inquisitors at his back. Their silver-plated armor hummed with the magic they used to suppress rogue wolves. Truth be told, I wanted to rip their throats out just for breathe the same air as her. I stood at the foot of the bed. I kept my posture rigid. I made my face a mask of bored cruelty. You've been in here a long time, Torin, Vane said. He circled the bed like a vulture. The guests are asking questions. The council is concerned. Why is this filth still in your bed instead of a cage? She is an interrogation subject, I said. My voice was as dry as a desert bone. In fact, she's a goldmine of information about the rogue movements in the north. Vane leaned over Elara. She played her part well. She kept her eyes shut. She kept her breathing shallow. Still, I could see the way her pulse jumped in her neck. I stepped between them. I used my height to cast a shadow over her. Don't touch her, I commanded. Why? Are you afraid I'll break your new toy? Vane sneered. I'm afraid you'll contaminate the evidence, I snapped. She's lowborn. Feral. But she knows where the smugglers are hiding. If you want the borders secure, you let me break her my way. Next, Vane looked at the Inquisitors. He was looking for a reason to doubt me. Maybe it was fate, but the physician stepped forward then. He showed Vane a tray of bloody bandages I had secretly told him to prepare. She is diseased, Chancellor, the physician lied. Malnutrition. Fever. It would be unwise to move her to the public cells. She might infect the guard. To make things worse, the smell of the Inquisitor's silver was making my wolf sick. He wanted to lunge. He wanted to tear Vane's head off for looking at Elara like she was trash. Rather than fighting, I turned my back on them. Go back to your party, Vane, I said. I'll have a full report by morning. Until then, my doors stay locked. Eventually, the Chancellor relented. He didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with a king in his own bedroom. He left with a final, suspicious glance at the bed. The moment the doors clicked shut, the air in the room seemed to rush back in. Elara opened her eyes. She looked at me with a mix of fear and something that looked like respect. You lied to him. I did, I said. Which meant I just put a target on both of our backs. Chapter 8, The Price of a Soul. As the silence stretched, I realized that lying was the easy part. The hard part was going to be the truth. I walked over to the sideboard and poured a cup of water. I brought it to her. Her hands were still shaking, so I held the cup to her lips. She drank greedily. A drop of water ran down her chin. Without thinking, I wiped it away with my thumb. The moment their eyes locked, I felt the bond pulse again. It was a rhythmic throb behind my ribs. It was warm. It was agonizing. You have to go, she whispered. I know, I said. The oak tree with the split trunk. The northwest border. You can't go yourself, she gasped. Her eyes went wide. You're the king. If they catch you in the dead zone. I'm the only one who can move without being questioned, I told her. Besides, I have the sight. I can see the trail you left. I can find them before the scavengers do. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide her relief. She sank back into the pillows. Her world tilted as the medicine finally took hold. She looked so small in the middle of my massive bed. Why? She asked again. You're the man who destroyed my world. Why would you save what's left of it? Because a hand built for slaughter needs to learn how to hold something precious, I said. The words felt raw in my throat. Soon after, I changed into my hunting leathers. I left a loyal guard at the door, a man whose life I had saved in the war. I didn't tell him who she was. I just told him to kill anyone who tried to enter. That night, I slipped out of the citadel through the servant tunnels. The cold air of the mountains hit me. It felt good. It felt honest. I shifted into my wolf form beneath the moonlight. My fur was obsidian black. My eyes were the color of a dying star. I ran. I didn't run like a king. I ran like a beast possessed. By the time I reached the edge of the dead zone, the sun was a faint memory. The land was gray and bone dry. In fact, it looked worse than I remembered. It was a scar on the earth. And I was the one who had made it. Chapter 9, The Ghost Pack. I tracked her scent. It was easier now that I knew the frequency of her soul. I followed the smell of bitter bark in mountain air. It led me deep into a valley where the trees looked like twisted skeletons. Just like that, I saw it. The oak tree. Its trunk was split down the middle as if by lightning. Under the weight of his stare, even though I was alone, the land felt heavy with the eyes of the dead. I shifted back into my human form. I was shivering, but not from the cold. I found the hidden trapdoor under a pile of dead leaves and rotted wood. I pulled it open. The smell that hit me made my heart ache. It was the smell of unwashed fur, old straw, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. I climbed down the ladder into the dark cellar. Before she could move, or rather, before they could, 6 pairs of glowing eyes snapped toward me. They weren't wolves. Not yet. They were just pups. They were huddled together in a corner, shivering. The oldest was a girl, maybe 10 years old. She held a broken table leg like it was a sword. "Where is she?" the girl hissed. Her voice was tiny but fierce. "Where is Elara?" "She sent me," I said. I reached into the bag I had brought. I pulled out a loaf of bread and a thick piece of roasted meat. The moment the scent of food hit the air, the silence broke. The smallest pup let out a whimper. They didn't run to me. They were too smart for that. They waited, their eyes darting between me and the food. "She's safe," I told them. I set the food on the floor and stepped back. "She's at the Citadel. She told me to feed you." As if pulled by a string, the pups scrambled forward. They didn't eat like children. They ate like animals. They fought over the scraps, their little growls echoing in the tiny stone room. It was the most beautiful and horrifying thing I had ever seen. What followed was a realization that shattered my soul. These children were the survivors of the Silver Veil. They were the ones I was supposed to have cleansed. I sat on the dirt floor and watched them. More importantly, I watched the way they looked at me. They didn't see a king. They saw a stranger with bread. "Is she coming back?" the oldest girl asked. She had a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "I'm going to bring her to you," I promised. "Or I'm going to bring you to her." As the truth unraveled, I knew I couldn't leave them here. This cellar was a tomb. But the Citadel was a cage. I had to find a third way. I had to build something new. And she let it happen. Elara had trusted me with her heart's only treasure. I couldn't let it break. I gathered the empty bag and climbed back out into the night. My journey back was slower. I was carrying the weight of 6 lives on my shoulders now. And just like that, everything changed. I wasn't just hiding a princess. I was harboring a revolution. What's worse, I knew Vane would be waiting for me when I got back. Chapter 10, The King's Shadow. I returned to the Citadel while the forest held its breath, the first light of dawn bleeding across the sky like a fresh wound. My lungs burned from the run. My heart felt heavy, not from the distance, but from the faces of those starving children. I slipped through the servant entrance and made my way back to the royal wing, my skin still smelling of the damp cellar in desperate hope. Moments later, I found my loyal guard standing outside my door. He gave me a sharp nod, but his eyes were tight with worry. Truth be told, I knew that look. It meant the vultures had been circling while the lion was away. "Report," I whispered, my voice a low rumble. "Vane came by twice, sire," the guard muttered. "He tried to demand entry. He said he had new intelligence regarding the rogue's bloodline. I told him you were in a deep meditative trance and weren't to be disturbed." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, or rather, beneath my own, I felt a surge of cold fury. Vane was digging. He was a hound that had caught a scent, and he wouldn't stop until he found the bone. I entered the room and locked the door behind me. Elara was awake. She was sitting up in bed, her silver-gray eyes wide and searching. The moment our eyes locked, the air thickened. She didn't ask if I had found them. She could smell the dead zone on my clothes. She could smell the pups on my skin. "They're alive," she breathed. Her voice was a soft, trembling thing. "They're fed," I corrected. I walked to the bed and sat on the edge. "They're brave, Elara." The oldest, the girl with the table leg, nearly took my eye out. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was the first time I had seen it. In that moment, her world tilted, and mine did too. She looked human. She looked like a girl who deserved a garden and a sun that didn't hide. "Thank you," she whispered. Before she could move, I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers weren't as cold as before. "We can't keep them there. The winter is coming, and Vane is getting suspicious. He's looking for a reason to execute you to prove his own power." Chapter 11, The Secret Kennels. What followed was a plan born of desperation. I couldn't keep her in my bed forever, and I couldn't leave the pups in a hole. Because of that, I decided to use the only part of the Citadel the Council never visited, the old kennels. They were deep in the foundation of the fortress, built by my ancestors before the civilized laws of the Council took over. That night, I moved the pups. I used a horse-drawn supply carriage, hiding them under crates of empty wine bottles. Not only that, but I had to drug their water slightly so they wouldn't howl as we passed the main barracks. My heart skipped every time a wheel creaked. By the time we reached the hidden entrance to the kennels, I was drenched in sweat. I carried them one by one. The kennels were large, stone-walled, and filled with fresh hay. It wasn't a palace, but it was warm. It was safe. "Where are we?" the oldest girl asked as she woke up. She looked at the massive stone arches. "Somewhere the Chancellor can't find you," I said. Soon after, I brought Elara down. I had to lead her through the secret servant passages, my hand never leaving the small of her back. Every heartbeat felt like a drum. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a sizzling physical romance starting to spark in the shared danger. The moment the pups saw her, the silence roared. They didn't growl. They let out tiny, high-pitched yips of joy. They swarmed her, burying their faces in her skirts. Elara fell to her knees, sobbing as she pulled them into her arms. "You did it," she choked out, looking up at me through her tears. "You actually did it." In fact, her scent was changing. The ghost smell was fading. It was being replaced by the vibrant, sweet scent of a living mate, of gold, honey, and defiance. My wolf pressed forward, wanting to join the huddle, wanting to be the alpha of this strange, broken pack. "I told you I would," I said. My chest ached with a feeling I couldn't name. Chapter 12, The Chancellor's Trap. But then, the world reminded me that I was still a king in a cage. I left Elara with the pups and returned to the throne room, trying to look like a man who hadn't just committed treason. Vane was waiting for me. He wasn't alone. He had the High Council of Elders with him. They were sitting in their high-backed chairs, looking like a row of crows on a fence. "Torin," Vane said. His voice was too calm. "We've been reviewing the archives. Specifically, the birth records of the Silver Veil. Maybe it was fate, but my hand went to my sword. I didn't draw it, but the threat was there." "And? What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Vane said. He held up a piece of parchment. It was old. It was stained. We found a record of a younger daughter. A princess who was never accounted for during the purge. A girl with silver-gray eyes. What's worse, he looked at me with a predatory intensity. And then, one of my spies reported seeing the king carrying a rogue with those exact eyes into the royal wing. A girl who has been eating like a queen while the rest of the rogues starve. As the truth unraveled, I realized the stakes had just reached a breaking point. Vane wasn't just guessing. He was building a scaffold. She is a political prisoner, I said, my voice like iron. She is a silver veil abomination. Vane screamed. He slammed his hand on the table. And you are harboring her. Unless, of course, you'd like to prove us wrong. Bring her here. Right now. Let the Inquisitors test her blood. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't hide her lineage from a blood test. If I brought her here, she would die. If I refused, it was a confession. The girl is mine, I growled, my wolf finally baring his teeth. By right of capture. By right of the throne. Is she? Vane sneered. Or is she your mate? Because that would make you a traitor to everything we've built, Torin. A king who sleeps with the ghost of his enemy. The tension broke when Vane pulled out a silver dagger. He didn't point it at me. He pointed it toward the floor, toward the very stones that led to the secret kennels. We know about the extra meat being sent to the basement, Alpha King, Vane whispered. The game is over. And just like that, everything changed. My secret was out. My mate was in danger. And the council was ready for war. I had to decide. My crown, or my soul. As the sky darkened outside, I knew there was no going back. The midpoint had been reached. The war I had tried to avoid was standing right in front of me. What followed was the most dangerous choice of my life. Chapter 13, The Alpha's Choice. The air in the throne room turned to lead as Vane's words hung between us. My wolf was no longer pacing, he was crouched, ready to tear through my skin and paint the marble red. Still, I forced my hands to remain steady at my sides. Because of that, Vane thought he had won. He stepped closer, his scent like rot hidden under perfume, and he smiled with the teeth of a man who had waited 10 years to see me crawl. You have 1 hour, Torin, Vane whispered. Bring the girl to the courtyard for execution, or we will go down to those kennels and slaughter every breathing thing ourselves. Before she could move, or rather, before I could strike, the Council of Elders rose as one. They moved like shadows, leaving the room in a silence that roared louder than any scream. I stood alone in the center of the hall. My world tilted. I had spent a decade trying to be the king they wanted, but in the span of a breath, I realized that a crown held by puppets is just a different kind of noose. Moments later, I was running. I didn't care about the guards. I didn't care about the protocol. I reached the secret kennels and burst through the heavy stone door. Elara was sitting on a pile of hay. She was holding the smallest pup in her lap. The moment our eyes locked, she knew. She saw death in my expression. She stood up, her body moving on instinct, placing herself between me and the children. They found us, she said. It wasn't a question. They found you, I rasped. I walked to her and gripped her shoulders. The space between them burned. Vane knows who you are. He knows about the pups. Without thinking, she leaned into my touch. Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained like steel. Then kill me. If you do it now, maybe they'll let the children go. No, I growled. No more martyrs. No more blood for a peace that doesn't exist. What followed was a moment of raw truth. I pulled her against me. I buried my face in her neck, breathing in the honey and wood smoke of her skin. Deep down, she knew the truth. I wasn't just her captor anymore. I was her mate. Her bones remembered me, even if her mind still feared me. Chapter 14, The Signet of the Veil. As the silence stretched, the pups huddled around us. They didn't whimper. They were children of war, they knew the sound of a closing trap. Still, I had to be the alpha they needed. I reached into the hidden pocket of my tunic and pulled out a heavy gold ring. It was my father's signet, the only thing I had left that hadn't been touched by the council's filth. "Take this," I said, pressing the ring into Elara's palm. "Torin, I can't." "Hide it," I commanded. "If we are separated, this ring will open the western gate. My loyalists will recognize it. It's a promise of protection." Maybe it was fate, but she didn't argue. She tucked the ring into the lining of her tattered dress. Not only that, but she reached up and touched my jaw. Her touch was a precious gift. It felt like fire blooming beneath my skin. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You could just give me up. You could keep your throne." "The throne is a pile of cold stones," I told her. "You are the only thing in this kingdom that's actually alive." Soon after, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the stairs above. The Inquisitors were coming. I could smell the silver they carried, the metal that burned our kind, the metal the council used to keep us civilized. "Stay behind me," I warned. My instincts surged. My wolf pressed forward, his golden eyes bleeding into my own. The doors were kicked open. Vane stood there, backed by 20 men with silver-tipped spears. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and impending slaughter. Truth be told, I had never felt more like a king than I did in that moment, standing in the dirt of a kennel to defend a ghost. "Time is up, Alpha King," Vane sneered. "Hand over the silver veil, bitch." Chapter 15, The Breaking of the Bond. "Her name is Elara," I said. My voice was a low snarl that made the pups whimper. "And she is my mate. If you want her, you'll have to walk over my corpse to get her." What's worse, Vane didn't look surprised. He looked disappointed. We expected as much. Which is why we didn't just bring spears. Without warning, the Inquisitors stepped aside. 2 guards dragged forward the oldest girl from the cellar, the one who had tried to fight me with a table leg. They had a silver collar around her neck. The girl was crying, her eyes wide with terror. "One move, Torin, and the girl dies," Vane said. "The council has revoked your command. You are no longer Alpha. You are a traitor." Before the words left her lips, Elara let out a strangled cry. She moved to step forward, to give herself up, but I held her back. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the little girl in the silver collar. "Please," Elara whispered, looking at me with eyes full of agony. "Don't let them hurt her." "I'll go. I'll go with them." No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hide the sacrifice in her soul. She was choosing the child over herself. She was choosing my safety over her life. And just like that, I felt the bond crack. Not because it was breaking, but because the pain of it was too much for a human heart to hold. "I'll go," Elara repeated, louder this time. She stepped out from behind me. "Elara, no." I reached for her, but Vane's men leveled their silver spears at my chest. "Let her go, Torin," Vane commanded. "Unless you want to watch the pup bleed." Moments later, the Inquisitors moved in. They grabbed Elara. They didn't use silk and lace this time. They used iron chains. They dragged her toward the door. The pups let out a collective howl of grief that shattered the last of my restraint. I tried to lunge. I tried to shift. But as her wolf stirred, she looked back at me. She mouthed one word, live. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I felt her pull away from the bond. She was cutting herself off to save me from the council's wrath. The space between them burned as they dragged her into the darkness of the hallway. And just like that, everything changed. I was left in the dirt with 6 orphans and a hollow chest. My name hung in the air, a silent plea from a girl who was walking toward her death. Still, I didn't move. I couldn't. I had to wait. I had to let them think they had one. What followed was the beginning of the end. The point of no return had been crossed, and as the sky darkened outside, I knew that come morning, the Obsidian Citadel would either have a new queen or it would burn to the ground. And she let it happen, but I wouldn't. Chapter 16, The Silence of the Throne. The throne room felt like a tomb, and I was the ghost haunting the gold. I sat on my obsidian seat while the forest held its breath. My hands were gripped so tight on the armrests that the stone began to crack. High Chancellor Vane stood at the podium below. He was speaking to the noble houses, but I didn't hear a word. All I could hear was the phantom echo of Elara's chains rattling against the dungeon floor. The king has been misled, Vane told the crowd. His voice was smooth, like poison dipped in honey. In fact, the Silver Veil girl used ancient, forbidden magic to cloud his mind. She isn't a mate. She's a parasite. Because of that, the nobles began to whisper. They looked at me with pity. They looked at me with fear. Truth be told, I wanted to leap from the dais and tear the tongues out of every lying mouth in the room. But the inquisitors stood in every corner. They held their silver spears high. They had the pups in a secondary cage behind the curtain. If I moved, the children would die. She must be cleansed, Vane declared. The bloodline of the Silver Veil ends tomorrow at dawn. Publicly. To show the world that the Obsidian King is once again pure. Next, Vane turned to me. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to beg. Instead, I stared at him with the eyes of a dead flint. My wolf was silent now. He wasn't pacing. He was coiled like a spring, waiting for the 1 second of weakness that would let us kill everyone in the room. Do you have anything to say, Alpha? Vane sneered. The moon sees everything, I rasped. My voice sounded like a shovel hitting dry dirt. Still, Vane just laughed. He waved a hand, and the guards dragged me toward my quarters. I was a king under house arrest. I was a prisoner in my own skin. Chapter 17, The Confession of a Saint. That night, the darkness in my room was absolute. I paced from the door to the window. I felt the bond pulsing, but it was weak. It felt like a heartbeat fading out in the snow. Without warning, the small iron grate at the bottom of my door slid open. A tray of food was pushed through. She confessed, sire, a voice whispered. It was my loyal guard. His voice was thick with shame. What? I fell to my knees by the door. They put her on the rack. They threatened the pups, the guard said. Before the words left her lips, she told the council she was a spy. She said she seduced you. She said you were innocent of everything. Her world tilted, or rather, mine did. She was doing it again. She was being the martyr. She was choosing to die as a villain so I could live as a king. It was the ultimate betrayal of our bond. She didn't think I was strong enough to save her, or she thought I was too important to lose. Where is she? I demanded. The deep pits, the guard whispered. The silver-lined cells. No one gets in. Not even you. What followed was the lowest moment of my life. I sat in the dark and put my head in my hands. I was a butcher who couldn't protect his own heart. I was a failure. Maybe it was fate, but I looked at my hands and saw the scars from the purge. I had killed for the council. I had bled for the council. And as a result, they were taking the only thing that made me human. In the quiet that followed, I let out a sound that wasn't a growl or a cry. It was a whimper. It was the sound of a wolf who had lost his pack. I was alone. Chapter 18, The Breaking Point. Moments later, the door opened. Vane stepped in alone. He looked smug. He held a piece of parchment, the official execution order. "Sign it," Vane commanded. "Sign it, and we let the pups live in the colonies. Refuse, and they go to the block with her." "You're a monster," I said. "I'm a statesman," he countered. "In fact, I'm the one who saved you from yourself." "She's a ghost, Torin. Let her go." I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so hard the ink splattered like black blood. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. Deep down, she knew the truth. I couldn't sign her death warrant. But if I didn't, the children would die. "I can't," I whispered. "Then you've chosen their deaths," Vane said. He reached for the paper. But then, I did something he didn't expect. I didn't sign the paper. I didn't attack him. I lunged at the wall. I punched the obsidian stone with everything I had. My knuckles shattered. The pain was a white-hot explosion that cleared my head. "What are you doing?" Vane hissed, backing away. "I'm waking up," I said. Before he could move, I struck him. Not with a wolf's claw, but with a soldier's fist. I knocked him unconscious before he could scream. I dragged his body to the wardrobe and locked him inside. As the silence roared, I looked at the wall I had punched. A stone had shifted. It was loose. I pulled at it, my broken fingers bleeding. Behind it was a dark, narrow passage. As fate whispered, I remembered my father's dying words about the blood path, a way for kings to escape when the citadel turned into a cage. I didn't have my crown. I didn't have my army. But as I crawled into the darkness, I felt my wolf finally stand up. We were going to the pits. We were going to the silver. And just like that, everything changed. I wasn't a king anymore. I was a predator. What followed was the most dangerous walk of my life. "I am coming for you, Elara. Wait for me." Chapter 19, The Blood Path. I crawled through the narrow gut of the citadel, the rough stones scraping the skin from my shoulders. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and 1,000 years of rot. My broken hand throbbed in time with my heart, but I used the pain to keep my wolf from howling in the dark. Still, I pushed forward because the woman I loved was breathing her last in a silver cage. Moments later, the tunnel opened into a ledge high above the deep pits. I looked down and saw the silver-lined cells glowing with a sickly, blue light. It was a cold, magical fire that felt like needles in my eyes. Truth be told, I had never seen the pits from this angle. It was where we sent the feral ones to be forgotten. Before she could move, or rather, before I could jump, I saw her. Elara was chained to a stone pillar in the center of the pit. Her head was bowed. Her silver-gray eyes were closed. But she wasn't crying. In fact, she was humming. It was a low, steady sound that vibrated through the stones. As the silence roared, I realized she wasn't humming for herself. She was humming the same song she used to soothe the pups. Without thinking, I leaped from the ledge. I landed in the mud and filth of the pit floor. The silver in the air hit me like a physical wall. It burned my lungs. It made my wolf shrivel in agony. Yet, I stood up. I dragged my heavy boots through the muck until I was standing right in front of her. "Elara," I whispered. My voice was a broken rasp. Her head snapped up. The moment their eyes locked, I saw her world tilt. She didn't look relieved. She looked horrified. "Torin? No. You have to go," she gasped. Her voice trembled. "If they find you here, if the silver gets into your blood." "Let it," I said. I grabbed the silver chains with my bare hands. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the silver burned into my palms. I could smell my own flesh scorching. I didn't let go. I pulled with everything I had. My bones remembered him, the man who had been a butcher, and I used that old, dark strength to snap the metal. Between one breath and the next, she was free. She fell into my arms. Her scent was a mix of blood and hope. "You're a fool," she sobbed into my chest. "I'm a king," I corrected. "And it's time I started acting like one." Chapter 20, The Shadow Pack Rises. What followed was a prison break fueled by fury. I didn't hide anymore. I didn't sneak. I carried Elara toward the upper levels. We reached the guard room, and before the words left her lips, I had already neutralized the two men at the door. I didn't kill them. I looked them in the eye. "I am your Alpha King," I commanded. My voice was the roar of a mountain sliding into the sea. "Do you serve the council, or do you serve the pack?" As the silence stretched, the guards looked at each other. They looked at my burned hands. They looked at the silver veil princess in my arms. One by one, they knelt. "We serve the king," they whispered. Soon after, a dozen more soldiers joined us. These were the men who had hated the purge. These were the ones who had been waiting for a reason to be honorable again. Because of that, we moved through the citadel like a shadow that couldn't be stopped. "The pups are in the west wing," Elara said. She was leaning on me, her strength returning with every step. "We get the children," I said. "And then we take the throne." Maybe it was fate, but we reached the west wing just as the sun began to rise. The sky was turning a violent shade of orange. We found the cage. The pups were huddled together, their eyes wide with terror as an inquisitor raised a silver lash. Without thinking, I shifted. The transformation was intense. My bones snapped and reformed. My obsidian fur erupted from my skin. It wasn't a tactical move, it was a primal explosion of love and rage. I lunged across the room. I was a blur of teeth and shadow. The Inquisitor didn't even have time to scream. I pinned him to the wall, my growl vibrating the very stones of the citadel. "Open the cage," I snarled in the tongue of the wolves. As the silence roared, the pups were released. They ran to Elara, their tiny bodies shaking. She held them, her face glowing with a fierce, protective light. At that moment, she wasn't a ghost. She was a queen. Chapter 21, The Final Stand. "Vane is in the throne room," the oldest girl said, clutching Elara's hand. "He's crowning a new king. He says you're dead, Torin." "Then I suppose I should go give him the bad news," I said, shifting back to my human form. I was naked, covered in scars and soot, but I had never felt more powerful. What followed was the March of the Forgotten. I led the way. Elara walked beside me. The pups followed in our shadows, and my loyalists formed a wall of steel around us. We walked toward the great hall. Every step I took, I felt the bond with Elara pulsing. It was strong now. It was a bridge of light between our souls. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been waiting 10 years for this," I told her. Before either could speak, we reached the massive gold-leafed doors of the throne room. I could hear Vane's voice inside. He was talking about purity and order. He was telling the people that the starving crown was finally safe. "He's wrong," Elara whispered. "He's about to find out how wrong," I said. I looked at Elara. Her scent was no longer bitter. It was the smell of lightning and iron. It was the smell of a forest in full bloom. I reached out and touched the signet ring she had hidden. "This isn't just about a throne," I told her. "It's about the pack." Without another word, I kicked the doors open. The sound was like a thunderclap. The hundreds of nobles inside turned as one. They saw their dead king standing there. They saw the abomination beside him. They saw the children they had tried to erase. The tension broke as I stepped into the light. And just like that, everything changed. The final push had begun. Vane's face went white as a sheet. He reached for his silver dagger, but his hand was shaking. "The king is back," I said. My voice filled every corner of the room. "And he's brought the truth with him." As the sky darkened outside, the throne room became a battlefield. What followed was the end of the old world. Chapter 22, The King's Justice. The throne room was a sea of golden cowards, but the moment I stepped onto the marble, the air turned to ice. I walked through the center of the hall. My bare feet left bloody prints on the polished floor. Beside me, Elara walked with her head held high. She looked like a goddess of war born from the ashes. High Chancellor Vane stood by my throne. He was holding a crown over the head of a trembling cousin of mine. "Treason!" Vane shrieked. His voice broke like cheap glass. "Guards! Kill the rogue! Kill the traitor!" But then, something happened that Vane didn't expect. The guards didn't move. They looked at my burned hands. They looked at the 6 pups standing behind Elara with their teeth bared. Still, I didn't reach for a sword. I didn't need one. I drew in a breath that felt like it came from the very roots of the mountain. "I am Torin Blackwood." I roared. The sound made the chandeliers scream in protest. "I am the alpha of the Obsidian pack. By the laws of the moon, I claim my right to speak." As the silence roared, I used Alpha's command. It wasn't just a shout, it was a physical weight that forced every shifter in the room to their knees. Even Vane buckled, his face hitting the floor with a satisfying thud. Truth be told, I had spent 10 years suppressing this power. Now, I let it flood the room like a dam breaking. The silver veil didn't die because of a threat, I told the crowd. My voice was a hammer of truth. They died because the council wanted their land. They died because I was too weak to say no. In fact, we've been eating bread soaked in the blood of our neighbors for a decade. I looked at Vane. He was crawling toward the back exit. "Where are you going, Chancellor?" "The ceremony is just getting started." Before the words left her lips, Elara stepped forward. She pulled the signet ring from her dress and held it high. The silver wolf caught the light, and for a moment, the room felt warm. "I am Elara of the Silver Veil," she announced. Her voice was steady. It was beautiful. "I am the heir to the mountains. I don't come for revenge. I came home." Chapter 23, The Falling Action. What followed was the total collapse of the council's web of lies. My loyalists moved in and stripped the inquisitors of their silver spears. We didn't need a battle, the truth had already done the killing. Vane was dragged to the center of the room. He wasn't a statesman anymore. He was a small, shivering man who had run out of secrets. "What do we do with him, Alpha?" one of my generals asked. I looked at Elara. She was the one who had suffered the most. She was the one whose family he had erased. She walked over to Vane. She looked down at him with those silver-gray eyes that had seen the worst of humanity. "Let him live," she said. Her voice was a soft, sharp blade. "Take his titles. Take his wealth. Send him to the dead zone. Let him see if he can survive on purity and order when there's no bread in his belly." Because of that, Vane let out a pathetic wail. It was a perfect justice. I looked at my people. I saw the shame on their faces, but I also saw the relief. The starving crown was finally being fed with the truth. Moments later, I walked to the throne. I didn't sit in it. Instead, I grabbed the heavy obsidian chair and shoved it off the dais. It crashed into the floor, shattering into 1,000 black shards. "We don't need a throne," I said. "We need a pack." And just like that, everything changed. I turned to Elara. At that moment, the space between them burned with a different kind of heat. It wasn't the heat of war. It was the heat of a blooming forest. I reached out and touched her cheek. "Will you stay?" I asked. "Only if we plant trees where the fires were," she whispered. "We'll plant a forest," I promised. Chapter 24, The New Equilibrium. Come morning, the Obsidian Citadel looked different. The silver spears were gone. The heavy curtains were pulled back to let in the sun. I stood in the courtyard, watching the 6 pups run through the grass. They were laughing. It was a sound that had been illegal in this place for too long. Elara walked up beside me. She was wearing a dress of soft green silk, and her skin was finally glowing with health. She looked at the children, then she looked at me. Her soul answered mine before she even spoke. "The dead zone is starting to change," she said. "The scouts say the frost is melting. The grass is coming back." "Maybe it was fate," I said. I pulled her into my arms. Her scent was gold and honey and home. Or maybe it's just because we finally stopped fighting the moon. What followed was a moment of pure, unadulterated peace. I leaned down and kissed her. It was a long, slow kiss that tasted of the future. The bond pulsed between us, a steady, joyful rhythm that told me I was finally worthy of holding what I loved. "I'm hungry," she whispered against my lips, a playful glint in her eyes. "Then let's eat," I said. And this time, we eat together. As the sky darkened to a peaceful, starry blue, the starving crown became a myth. We held a feast in the courtyard. There were no noble tables. There were no secret larders. Everyone ate from the same pots, the soldiers, the orphans, and the king and queen. I looked at my hands. They were still scared. They would always be the hands of a butcher. But as I watched Elara take a full, joyous bite of bread, I knew they were also the hands of a protector. The story ended not with a crown, but with a full stomach and a warm heart. And she let it happen, and so did I. Epilogue, 1 year later. That night, a year after the fall of the council, I stood in the heart of the Silver Vale. The forest was lush. The trees were tall. Elara stood in the center of a clearing, holding a small bundle wrapped in fur. "He has your eyes," she said, looking down at our son. "And your spirit," I whispered, wrapping my arms around them both. Under the weight of his stare, the moon's stare, we were finally whole. The dead zone was a memory. The starving crown was a ghost. We were just a family, breathing in the scent of a blooming forest. The wind carried our names through the trees, and for the first time in my life, I didn't mind the sound of the wind. Because it sounded like home. The end.